Okay, well, good evening, folks. We are just waiting for 160 odd delegates or participants to join us on this webinar tonight. Take care, take strong, stay strong. Please use the chat room to let us know where you are from. If you've got any comments as we're going through the presentation tonight, please put them into the chat room as well. If you have any questions, please put those into the Q&A section so that we can come to those either partway through or at the end of the session. So tonight's session has actually been funded by the Victorian government and they have given us some money to develop a program, a PowerPoint, etc., that we can share, particularly for Victorians, but as we know from the session we did a couple of days ago, there's a lot of people from around Australia. With me today, I've got Kathleen Mills, who is a mental health practitioner, and Kathleen has been seconded to AUSactive for going on almost a year, isn't it, Kathleen, now?
6 months.
6 months, just seems like a year. Just seems like a year. Okay, well, there we go. So tonight we're talking about how to stay on top of our mental fitness. And we know during COVID that it has been a very trying time for all of us. Those of you who are in business, those of you who are personal trainers, it's been a really hard time for the last 2.5 years. We've had lockdowns, we've had commentary in the media from chief health officers and premiers, haven't been really sort of, I guess, particularly positive about our industry or about our profession. It's been very, very difficult for many of us. And just as it has been for us, it has been for your clients as well. So tonight we're going to be talking about how to take care of yourself, how to stay strong, how to get resilience, build resilience, not just for yourself, but also how to, I guess, be a little bit more aware of what might be happening around you, with family, with colleagues, with people in your facilities or out in the park, you're running a boot camp and so on. And I guess with the untimely death of the rugby coach just a couple of days ago, it's really brought to the fore the issue of mental health and in that particular case, suicide. So just before we do start, I'll share with you as a CEO of Australia, CEO of AUSactive, I've certainly had my own issues with mental health and depression. And in fact, it was only in my early 20s when I was diagnosed by a psychiatrist with depression, and I look back on my life, that I realized I'd actually been experiencing depressive episodes since becoming a teenager. I started running as one of my ways of mitigating and managing it. And I very quickly learnt that running, endorphins generated, really helped me with my own mental fitness and mental health. I've also been a surfer for many, many years, and I find going down to the ocean, being outdoors is another way that I can really sort of mitigate those issues. But I'm very conscious of mental health and what it can do to people. I know how it can really debilitate and make life very, very difficult. I also learnt in just over 12 months ago that being very sad is not the same necessarily as being depressed or having a mental health issue. Unfortunately, my first grandchild was stillborn 12 months ago at 38 weeks. And the impact that had on my partner and myself, but more importantly on my son and his partner, was really quite devastating to look at. I didn't understand, didn't believe that so much sadness was actually possible to experience. But it didn't depress me. It just made me very, very sad. I'm lucky to say now that's passing. And my son and his partner have now had another beautiful little child, their second child now. So I share those things with you because I want you to understand that there is no shame, there's no stigma, there's no embarrassment talking about mental health. And one of the great things that's come out of COVID, if there is any good things come out of it, is the increased emphasis on mental health and the importance of exercise to manage it and mitigate it. So let's get started. I'd like to acknowledge that we are hosting this webinar from the lands of the Bunurong people and the Gadigal people here in Sydney. I also acknowledge the traditional owners of the various lands and participants in this webinar join us from today. And I pay my respects to all the elders past, present and emerging. So just again, if you can tell us in the chat room where you're from, put in any comments you've got, good, bad or ugly, And if you've got any questions, put those in the Q&A box and we'll come around to answering those in due course. So now I'm going to hand over to Kathleen, who, to make sure I stay awake, every now and then will ask me a question. Thanks, Kathleen.
Thank you, Barry. It's always a pleasure to work alongside you. My best webinar co-host, I have to say, that I've ever had. The only one I've ever had.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So yes, we're here tonight to talk about mental fitness. And as Barry's highlighted, COVID has definitely brought mental health to the fore. And we've probably talked about it more often than I would say, through the media and in amongst our friends and family and loved ones in the last 2 years than what we would normally have discussed. So we might start looking at the slides, Luke. Maybe it's Luke we need to wake up today, Barry. Here we go. Mental fitness. Here we have this is the more technical, I suppose, definition of mental fitness. It is the changeable capacity to utilise resources and skills to psychologically adapt to environmental challenges or advantages to meet psychological needs. And that sounds quite heavy, but if we just pop onto the next slide, we can see what does it look like in real life. Because when you mention mental health, it is quite different from mental fitness. So mental health can take in everything from mental health disorders or mental health issues through to, I suppose, whether you're doing well or not. Mental fitness is different. Mental fitness is the actual practical display of how you deal with your mental health. So mental fitness can look like being able to recognise when and where you require support. So seeing that you're maybe not travelling as well that you have been in the past and saying something's not right here, perhaps I need to do something about it. Having the capacity to cope with stress and recover from adversity. So we're all going to experience stress, and as I often say, if we live long enough, we're going to experience things that we don't want to experience, just like the sad story that Barry told us, but he's also told us about how his family has recovered. So it is really a perfect example of how mental fitness can look, that you can go from such a happy event to turning into such a sad event, and then coming through it and recovering from that to the best of your ability around that grief. Showing adaptability and endurance in a wide variety of circumstances. So this can be anything from personal experiences through to work, stress in the home, just normal health issues, those sorts of things. And pushing through physical, mental and emotional barriers. So this takes in everything from illness and sickness and to when we might be experiencing mental health issues. So let's have a look at some well-known people that, or one well-known person in particular that shows a high level of mental fitness. I'm sure everybody has heard of Tiger Woods. So he has risen from the ashes multiple times. His focus was second to none when he was on the course. His opponents were often known to say that they were all there to play each other and that Woods was in a different league. And he seemed to be like that mentally. I can think of some Aussie rules players that I've seen just watching a game, and I've seen them do that same thing. It's like everything else zones out and they are incredibly focused. Through injuries, scandals, his marriage breakdown, bad media and his father's death, he still showed up and played in the same style and with the same level of expertise that he did during times when he was not facing adversity. So once he stepped out onto that golf course, all bets are off, basically. He could focus on what he needed to do and rise above everything, whether it be injury as well, as the last little paragraph says there in 2008 when he played at the US Open and won. He was clearly battling a knee injury, but used his mental fitness to see his way through to take out that title. Now, I believe recently he was offered an exorbitant amount of money to play overseas. It was in somewhere was it the United Arab Emirates or somewhere in the, yeah. And he said no to that. So it just goes to show that even though he faced all of these issues, he still rose above to be probably one of the best, if not the best player that we've ever seen. And he's still sought after all these, I suppose, decades down the track. And so we invite you in the chat box there to mention other people that you think that are well known, that have displayed high levels of mental fitness. And if we move on to the next slide, we look at people in society. So people who have lived through wars and the Jewish Holocaust. Civilians are not generally equipped to deal with wars, so their freedoms are removed, uncertainty takes its place, and survival often becomes the foremost of people's minds. And Barry and I share this shared love of history, and I spend a lot of time studying war history, but I studied what happened with the communities and what happened with people left behind. And it was just this never-ending stories of people that would just have ingenuity take over. They created recipes out of what they had. They'd fashion devices to replace items that they could no longer access, and they would find ways to entertain themselves. And I think we've done this. We're all in the midst of a global pandemic, and we're all a good example of adapting to our environment and the circumstances, as difficult as it's been. We have all shown a level of mental fitness at different times to pull together and to get through those tough spots. And with wars, it's all done under a cloud of fear and uncertainty. So we know historically how long all of these great wars went for. But when they were in the middle of it, they had no idea whether it was going to end next week, next month, next year, in 10 years' time, or whether they were risking death. So they might be sent off to fight the war themselves. They might be left at home trying to feed people when there was a lack of food, and they had no idea how long they would be doing that for. So, I think if we look across history and different industries, time periods, socioeconomic backgrounds, we will find levels of mental or examples of mental fitness. And it's something that we don't often stop and think about, is that we all do have great coping skills. And the more that we enhance those, the better we will cope when we get through those difficult times. So this is the mental health continuum. And what it shows us is that we could forever, as human beings, moving up and down this continuum. So as you can see down one end, we have mental illness, which is when somebody's being diagnosed with a mental disorder, depression, anxiety, and there's a few other ones listed there. They've got low levels of functioning, they're in struggle, they might not be supported in the right way, so they might not be medicated if that's what they're needed, they might not be receiving any therapy or any other supportive measures. And then right at the other end, we have flourishing. So most people will spend their time around that positive mental health state there. They'll spend some time where they go back into becoming unwell, where things are they're a little bit of a struggle, and then they can progress towards languishing. Or alternatively, they might be in positive health mode, and then they find themselves in a real period of flourishing and everything's going well and they're moving forward at great rates of nine. What's important about this mental health continuum that Luke's just skipped back over is that to understand that if you do have a diagnosed mental illness, that doesn't mean that you won't spend time flourishing in a positive mental health. Because many people that do experience a mental health issue will find that when they've got the right supports around them and the right processes and perhaps medication if required in place, that they will spend the rest of their time up and down the mental health continuum. And I think Barry's a perfect example of that. Is there anything you'd like to add there, Barry?
Yeah, look, I mean, obviously on that spectrum that we've got there, Kathleen, normally I'm in the green zone, the positive mental health. Obviously, when I lost my first grandchild last year, that was very quickly dropped down to the languishing. I didn't get down to mental illness side of it. I have been there in the past. The thing that I guess I find still quite frustrating with society today is that, and even it's good we're talking about mental health rather than a mental illness, because there is still a huge stigma over the issue of mental illness and if you've been diagnosed with it and so on. And I can just a little anecdote to share that with the people that are on this webinar. My mother took her own life quite a few years ago, and I'm the youngest child of the family, and my older brother and sister wouldn't do the eulogy because they were so embarrassed that she'd actually taken her own life. And I just, to me, that really brought home and this was their own mother. They understood what she was going to before she took her own life and so on, but they didn't want to acknowledge the fact that she had actually suicided. And I do find sometimes I get a little bit frustrated when I read in the paper about people that suddenly die, and you have to read between the lines to work out what's actually happened. I had a very good friend that also took his own life as well, and when I was teaching, I had two students that did the same thing, not because of my teaching, I'd have to add, but because they were just not coping as adolescents. So we need to really get over this stigma and this, particularly for men, about this mental illness business.
Absolutely. And I think suicide and everything that's that is attached to it is very difficult. It's touched both sides of my family, and I've seen it rip people apart, rip the family apart. And I think back to when those times happened, and there was even less understanding back then than what there is now. And I look back and I wonder with both of those people whether or not, if they had have reached out for help, they were both males, if they had have reached out for help and received the support they needed, maybe they would have come out of that mental illness area and moved back up the health continuum to a much more happy life. And so we can only hope that the more that we talk about it and the more that that we are open and honest about how we feel, that we will help more and more people. And that's the hope of this webinar, is that if we get through to one person to reach out and seek some assistance that wouldn't have otherwise done so, well, then we're going to consider that to be a real win for us. So we move on to the next one. So this is talking about what flourishing might look like. So it looks different for everybody. We've got 73 people on this call, and all 73 of you will have a different version of what flourishing looks like. But in a general sense, it'll be someone that looks forward to going to work, that they're excited about learning new things or trying new things, and they feel a sense of satisfaction from their accomplishments. So they can see the positives, they can see the aspects of their life that they should be grateful for, and they, that they have that positive outlook and energy to carry through their day all of the time. So it's really, I always say it's a bit unrealistic to think that you'll be flourishing all of the time. I think it's very comfortable to be in that positive mental health state where you're doing well. Some days are really, really good and you're flourishing, and other days might not be as great. But if we could all flourish all the time, it'd be wonderful, but it is putting a lot of pressure on yourself as well. But when someone is becoming unwell, they might start to have some negative thoughts about themselves. They might question whether or not they're good at their job, or whether they're of any value in conversation. They might avoid activities that they normally enjoy. Like they might be somebody that normally goes out for dinner on a Friday night with their friends, but they start thinking, well, do I really want to do that? Do I have much to contribute to the conversation? Do people really want me there? Maybe I should just stay at home. And they start to cut themselves out of their normal activities that they're enjoying. They might not participate in their sporting activities, or as I said, not go to social events or so on. And it becomes much more of the norm for them than what it is the exception to the rule. And languishing. So this is, and I should say, if we look at the official diagnosis of the official aspects that you would see in depression, if you're going to be diagnosed with clinical depression, it says that you would have a feeling of helplessness, hopelessness, and various other mood changes that would be present all day, most days, for 2 continuous weeks. So that doesn't mean if you have a couple of bad days and you're not feeling yourself, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're clinically depressed. It might just mean that you need to put some processes in place to pick yourself up or reach out for some help. So languishing looks like lacking motivation in both getting to work and actively engaging in their work while they're there. So they might turn up, but they don't really turn up. They're just sort of a figure, like almost a cardboard cutout in the corner of the room. They might feel as if nothing ever changes for the better. So they take on that bit of a negative aspect, and they're thinking, oh, it's always this bad. It's always like this. Everything is always difficult. Everything is always a struggle. So they start to use those global statements where it's everything always, all of the time. And they might be unable or unwilling to make goals or plans. So they could be presented with all of these wonderful opportunities at work and at home, but they just don't really feel like they want to strive for anything. They don't recognise the opportunities, and they just don't feel like they want to adhere to anything going forward. So this is, we invite you here, if you'd like to share in the chat, what does it look like, or what have you noticed in people or yourself when you're languishing, or when you're flourishing, or when you think you're becoming unwell, or you're just not your normal self? What is it that you see yourself doing? Because as I said, everybody is a little bit different, and what works for one person when it comes to turning it around won't work for another, in the same way that the symptoms or the attributes that you'll start to show or that won't necessarily be the same. Click forward, Luke. And it's not an all or nothing. So I'd like to point this out as that this is a really strong point to drive forward, is that you can be flourishing in one area of your life and languishing in another. It doesn't have to be across the board. So you might find that a person enjoys their job, they're accomplishing tasks at work and feeling fulfilled and happy with what they're doing, but at home they feel lonely and have a genuine need for more social interaction. So, and this can be quite common because you see somebody at work and they look all alive and full of life and enthusiasm, and you don't know what they're like when they go home. So they could get there and they're just sitting there looking at their house, just not entirely, looking around, thinking I'm not entirely happy with myself, and I don't feel like this will ever change. So it doesn't have to be balanced, all bad or all good across all areas of your life. Likewise, someone might find it easy and fulfilling to study and they enjoy learning and engaging in new experiences. But at work, they're finding it difficult to use their skills because they're shy and they don't feel like they've got imposter syndrome, that they don't feel like they belong there, or they think that they're comparing themselves to everybody else in their workplace and they don't feel like they're as good as what those work colleagues are. But when they get into their study aspect, it might be in an online course or something, and they feel that they can contribute and everything's going really well. So it's just not balanced across all those areas of their life. Now we want to talk about stress. So everybody experiences stress, and some people notice it more than others. Some people are like we like to say stress heads, and other people just seem to float through life and not notice it. But the reality is that as human beings, we all face stress every day. So a daily stress is something that is expected through the daily course of our life. It is short-lived. It is something that we manage quite well generally. Aspects like getting yourself to work and the children to school. So if you've got children and you've got a job, it's going to happen. However many days that the children go to school 5 days a week and you go to school or go to work 5 days a week, this is something that's going to happen every morning. You'll be navigating traffic. You might feel like you're time poor because you're just trying to manage everything to get through the day. And you're working out what to feed the family for dinner. As I say, this is one of the ones you only have to look at social media and see the collection of memes and comments about feeding people and feeding the family and working out what to eat. And also, if we look at some of these businesses that have popped up that provide these dinner boxes, that their whole market is on we'll do the decision making for you to release that daily stress. And then trying to remember all the things you need to do that day. If you've got a memory like mine, you've probably got lists or everywhere, whether they be mental or on your phone or not, or physically written down, but just trying to remember, what is it that I need to do today? What time was that appointment? What time is this going on? What time am I picking a child up or dropping them off at basketball, or all of those things? So they're daily stresses. They're the parts that, as I said, short-lived, and they might not be there every day, or if they are there, you can handle them in most instances on your own. But chronic stresses are a little bit different. So these are stresses that are generally longer term. They have more of an effect on your life. They might be brought on to you by something other than your own choice. So, for instance, having a fast-paced job that involves processing large amounts of information. So I always point at Barry when we talk about this and say he was a school teacher. You're in a classroom, you've got 20, 26 children, students there. They're all at different levels of learning, different understanding. They might be from different language backgrounds, and you're the one that is needing to orchestrate their learning. So you need to be across everything. Exercise classes, group exercise classes are the same. You have all these people that you're trying to keep your eye on, and you feel responsible for them. So I'm sure, Barry, you miss those days of having the classroom full of students.
Most of my classrooms were full of 15, 16, 17-year-olds, actually, Kathleen. And
even worse.
If I could teach them anything, that was a good day. Most of the time you were spent in counselling, whether it be, drugs, employment, relationships, sexual relationships, and so on. Just want to make a comment about stress, though, because I think we need to acknowledge that stress can be a good thing as well. It's how we respond to stress, which is the issue. I read a book a couple of years ago. I can't remember the author, but it was called "Thank You for Being Late." And the story was basically about this guy who was waiting to go to a meeting. Sorry, he was waiting for a meeting. He was having a coffee, waiting for the other person to arrive. And the other person arrived 15 minutes late, and he apologized. Look, I'm sorry I'm really late. And he said, look, no, thank you for being late. And the other person said, well, why? And he said, because it's the only 15 minutes of the day I've had, which hasn't been pre-planned and pre-organized. And then the book goes on then to talk about how the rate of change in today's world, and this is something I think that's really important. When parents say to us, or older people like myself say to younger people, oh, you know, you don't know what it was like in the old days. Well, we don't know what it was like in the old days, but the fact of the matter is that stress now is higher than it ever has been. Taking out of that comment, people that might be in the Ukraine because of wars and things like that, but just general day-to-day work, day-to-day living is much more stressful now than ever has been. And one of the reasons for that is because of the rate of change in our community. Now, the rate of change, I'll just say something to you, the rate of change today has never been faster than it has throughout history. The rate of change tomorrow will never be slower than it has been throughout history. So what I mean is the rate of change that we're dealing with is exponential. So it's not a linear, it's not a straight graph. It actually goes up like that. And if you want to put that into some context, think about what the iPhones look like now. There's enough power on an iPhone to send a rocket and put man on the moon compared to what it was like 20 or 30 odd years ago. So the rate of change is exponential, but the human's ability to change is linear. So ours is not exponential. So rate of change goes up like that. Rate of change, the ability to deal with it goes like that. It does go up, but it goes like that. And that gap just gets wider. So as we get more and more into the future, that gap is going to become wider. So our having to cope with change, which is another form of stress, we need to be able to identify good stresses and bad stresses, things we need to pay attention to and things we need to actually ignore. And social media is one of those bloody things that I think people spend too much time focusing on things which aren't really that important. That's my teaching lesson for tonight, folks. So.
It's interesting you say that, Barry. I was in a webinar with somebody talking about mindfulness last week, and he was saying he's never owned a mobile phone. And this would have been a man in his late 50s, never owned a mobile phone. And everybody was putting in the chat box, how do people contact you? And he went, well, there is email. But he said, he's got a landline on his office. And he said, I've just learned to manage my time. People know I'm in the office between 9 and 5. If you'd like to ring, you can leave a message on there. He's got an answering machine, and he's never had a mobile phone. And he said, you don't miss what you've never had. Exactly. And that's very true. When we look historically, we look back and say, what did we do before mobile phones? We were probably less time poor because we were less contactable and we used our time differently.
There was a comment just went into the chat box then, Kathleen, about an individual who works in the kindergarten, about how children these days are coming along to kindy, quite different to children of a few years ago. And my background's early childhood, as you know, and 15 years in early childhood, even in that period, the issues that were presenting themselves with 3, 4, 5-year-olds was just quite incredible just over that short period.
Oh, definitely. The world has changed a lot since I was born, you were born, and even the children of today, they'll see in the next 10 years, huge changes.
Yeah.
So returning to our chronic stresses, I did see somebody popped into the chat box, how do we deal with chronic stresses? We're getting to that. Bear with us. Just be patient. We're going to talk about it. It's what we're here for. So interacting with people who have a variety of different needs. So again, very much like we were talking about with the teaching, you're trying to be across, you've got your attention across everything, and literally their lives may depend on you, or at least their well-being may depend on you. And that puts an added layer of stress on there as well. Coping with acute long-term illness or injury, disability or loss of mobility. And this takes in taking care of somebody who's experienced that as well. We all go through life hoping that we'll stay relatively well. We don't know what might happen to us. You could have an accident, a car accident that puts you out of action for a long period of time, or your loved one does. Again, you can get ill or develop a disability. Nobody asks or signs up to have these things happen to them, but they can, and it causes a lot of stress, not just for you, but for those around you as well. And recovering from grief. So grief, as we've talked about, can cause a huge amount of sadness and send you down to that languishing part of the mental health scale or the mental health continuum. That doesn't mean that you're experiencing a mental illness. It just, as Barry said, he didn't go into that mental illness. stage, but he did languish. And I'm sure he used his mental fitness to get himself back up to that scale. It doesn't mean that you forget. It just means that you learn to process it and to live with the experience. So now we're going to have a look at what chronic stress can do to the body. And of course, these are all aspects or symptoms that you'd look at if you've ruled out every other physiological medical cause for this and you've been to see your GP, but there's high blood pressure, irritable bowel syndrome, weight changes, eating too much or too little. I saw somebody popped emotional eating into the chat room before. Disorganized thinking, difficulty sleeping, irritability, muscle tension, gastrointestinal complaints, aches and pains, frequently being unwell or having constant infections and fatigue. So if you've ruled out everything else, then, we start to look at, is it stress that's doing this to me? And do I need to do something to try and assist my body and my mind to cope with that stress? So everybody, again, we've got 76 people on this call and everybody's going to have a different way to reduce stress. Exercise obviously should be the top of everybody's list at AUSactive, I would imagine, or movement. Getting some fresh air. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go outside for long periods of time, but if you're inside and everything's getting too much and you're feeling that stress, just that change of location, even if it's for a couple of minutes, stepping outside, filling your lungs with fresh air and just taking in some different surroundings can do a huge amount to reduce stress. Taking a warm, relaxing bath, you can add some aromatherapy oils or whatever it is that that suits you. Keeping a journal, I say, so people think journal and they often think diarising things and, dear diary, this happened to me. It can just be somewhere to vent, or it can be somewhere to just write down how you're feeling that day, or something that, you would like to get off your chest and just purge it out there. And you never have to show anyone. It can just be for you. You can even burn it. Between you people like to do that, burn things that they don't want other people to read and just really get rid of it, get it off your chest. Now, I say listening to calming music, but I point out I presented this in a face-to-face workshop and somebody put their hand up and went, no, they like really, some really decent music, and I can't remember, some type of rock band. But I think calming music, but Barry has other thoughts on that. Is Led Zeppelin?
Led Zeppelin, because calming music stresses me. Calming music stresses me. I need the Led Zeppelin particularly.
I like rain sounds. I can listen to storm and rain sounds, which has no music. So some people, if you get onto like Spotify, you can get a 10-hour playlist of fireplace sounds.
Well, Kathleen, there's a Led Zeppelin song called "The Rain Song." But maybe you should listen to that one.
You're trying to sell it to me, is that?
I don't have to sell it.
Yeah. So you can pick it. I find that with sleeping, if I can't sleep, I'm straight up, got headphones in, and I listen to the storm soundtrack on Spotify. Connecting with loved ones. So if you're feeling alone, if you're feeling disconnected, or you just need to talk to mum or whatever it is, or another loved one, whoever it is, reaching out and someone said singing, not my singing. I can tell you now, my singing would definitely not relax me or anybody else. But if it works for you, that's what's important. And it's that those specific activities that work for you. If you ignore them, if you know what I really need right now is to go and write this down, or you write poetry, some people write poetry or song lyrics. If you know that works for you and you avoid doing it, you're keeping yourself in that stressed state. So recognizing that you need to step out and to do those activities that are going to calm you, do them, because it's the best thing you can do for yourself. Balancing your mental fitness. So what will improve it? Getting enough sleep. I can't talk enough about sleep hygiene. It's really important. It's where our subconscious files everything that it needs to file for the day. It's how our body repairs and relaxes and gets us ready for the next day. Engaging in relaxing activities, as we've just mentioned on the previous page, what works for you is right. Practicing self-care, doing the things that you need to do for yourself. It can involve looking after yourself medically, physically, making sure you've got the right nutrition. Employing stress-reducing techniques, again, as we've discussed. Developing good interpersonal relationships. So if your life is full of toxic relationships that are hard to carry and hard to manage, that just adds to your stress and then does not support your mental fitness. So making sure that you've got those good interpersonal relationships, working within your limits, knowing when to say no, knowing when you need to delegate, knowing when this is beyond what you can take care of at this point in time. And that might change from week to week, month to month, year to year. So if you're not able to take on more at the moment, don't do it. But if you can, or you're excited about trying something new or extending, then you do that. But just knowing where those limits are and seeking support when needed. So of course, on the other side, all these things that can put pressure on you, being constantly sleep deprived. You think you turn up to work, you're tired, then you're trying to push through regardless. You're ignoring the fact that you're hungry, which is, because you haven't slept right or gotten up early enough to eat. Then you're ignoring your cues that your body is under stress. So you've got this headache and it's been with you for a week and you don't want to go and see the doctor and you're just taking Panadol. So you're not really looking after yourself. And then allowing that toxic friendship with someone that keeps texting you all the time with, attacking you or so on, doing more than you can manage. Yes, I'll take on those extra 2 shifts at work and just not asking for help when it's needed. All of those things will put a huge amount of pressure on your mental fitness. Now we're going to look at the biopsychosocial model. So this looks at the 3 different areas that come together to create our well-being. Obviously, biological, psychological, social, and environment. And if you have a look at where the biological crosses over with the social environment, you can see this is where we find issues of substance abuse. And psychological and social, that's our life events and our experiences. And biological and psychological, that's where our IQ sits and our temperament. So the idea of the biopsychosocial model is recognizing that within each of those 3 aspects, that there's different parts to that. And each of those parts will either be something we can control or something that we can't control. And the idea of this is that if we support the aspects of it that we can make changes in and that we can control, that it will help us in the areas that we can't. So obviously we can't choose, like neurochemistry and genetic vulnerability. They're dictated by genes and our brain chemistry. We don't all, some of us are blessed with fantastic neurochemistry and our neurotransmitters and everything works fabulously, but other people aren't. And obviously Barry has a history of mental illness in the family. You might find that neurotransmitters don't work incredibly well. So can't change that. You're born with those, same as the genetic vulnerability. You might have a couple of diseases that run in the family that might turn up at any time that you're concerned about. So you can't control that genetic vulnerability. But what you can control is your physical health and your stress reactivity, and saying, okay, if I look after myself physically and I manage my stress, then if these other issues come up, I might be better placed to be able to manage them, disability included. As we said before, nobody wakes up in the morning and says, I think I might develop a disability. That sounds like fun. So these are things that we don't have control over, but we can use those other aspects to support the parts that we can't control. Same in the psychological factors. So if you think about personality, and this is a debatable grey area, some people say, we have control over our personality, but I think we're all sort of born as our little individuals, and then it is our attitudes and beliefs that will drive our behaviour. So you might be a very outgoing personality, and you might find that you have very strong attitudes and beliefs, and your behaviour exhibits that you would push those onto other people. But then you find what it does is it affects your ability, your coping and social skills, because you find interpersonal relationships difficult, and that affects your self-esteem and emotions. So if you understand what your attitudes and beliefs are and work out how your behaviour might be driving those self-esteem and emotions and your coping and social skills, you can create a better environment for yourself to live in with better interpersonal relationships. Looking at learning and memory as well, again, we'll refer to the teacher who, I always say, people learn differently. It's like they talk about teaching a fish to climb a tree. So it's, understanding how you learn and improving your memory, which that's definitely one I should have on my list. And all of those, understanding all of that, how you learn, what you need to learn to understand your personality, attitudes and beliefs, it is all intermingled, it's all interconnected. Just move on to the next one, Luke. Social factors, education. Now, we live in Australia where education is freely available. However, that's not the case for everybody. It's not their experience. They may have come from a background where education wasn't either valued. So if you've come from, I suppose, a background where education in women wasn't valued, you might arrive here and you don't have that same education that everybody else at your age or level should. And so you might be able to look at increasing your education, or you didn't have access to it when you were younger and you seek education out as an adult. That's something that we have somewhat control over. Might not all the time or when you're younger, but as you get older, you might look at what can I do to learn new things. And then social supports. Do I have good relationships with people? Am I being supported? Or do I need to find better friends, or do I need to find myself a better therapist, or different types of social circles to move in? And looking at peer relationships. Are the people that I spend my time with good for me? Are the people that I spend my time with making life a little bit harder? Family background, we can't change that. We were born to who we were born to. So we look at then, do you use your social supports to access education? And your socioeconomic status, again, your family background tends to dictate where you were born into a socioeconomic level. But are you able to change that? Is it something that your education, the social supports and your peer relationships might be able to help you improve? And your communication abilities, is there something that you need to learn when it comes to communication? I'm a relationship counsellor and I talk about communication levels and skills of communication constantly, because it is what makes or breaks relationships, whether it be a romantic relationship or a family relationship or a friendship relationship. Communication is the key to everything. So let's talk about action, reducing stress. So when we get stressed, the cortisol levels in the brain rise, and then we get jittery and you feel like your shoulders are up around your ears and you're just on edge all the time. And a stress reducing activity makes the endorphins increase. So what the idea is that we find activities that are going to drop your cortisol levels so you don't feel like you're on edge and stressed all the time. And they help those endorphins flow, so you feel happier and relaxed, because that's when you make better decisions, you compute things better in that brain of yours, and you're calmer and you're able to navigate life in a happier sense. What will reduce your stress? Well, scheduling personal time. So this is taking a break, using your holidays. If you've got RDOs, using those, all of those types of things, not working around the clock all the time. So saying, you know what, I need some personal time here to relax and do what I enjoy. So this person's got a journal too. So there you go, they're probably purging things they don't need. Taking regular meal breaks, making sure that your body is fueled with what it needs to be fueled with so that it can do the job that it needs to, that you want it to do. Being active. You know, if you're injured, looking at the movement that you can do. If you have an exercise routine that you really enjoy, obviously we're in the health and fitness industry, making sure that you practice what you preach. If you're saying to your clients, you need to do this and you need to have rest days to help your body, if you're saying that and you're not practicing it, then that's something that you need to look at. Unwinding and relaxing, taking some quiet time where you're not doing anything, as Barry was saying about the scheduling. That thank you for being late book. It's exactly that. Maybe having some time, if not every day, every couple of days, where you don't have anything scheduled and you're just there being. Getting enough sleep. I'm going to go on about sleep hygiene again, making sure that you're resting that body. The best sleep that we get is before midnight. There will be some more information to come on sleep hygiene. I've got a book on sleep hygiene sitting next to me on my desk here that's going to have some work come through on it. Staying connected to loved ones, so not isolating from everybody, and choosing the people that you do like to connect with and communicating with them, and looking after your personal medical appointments. So if you've got some type of medical issue that you need to keep on top of, make sure you go to those regular appointments. If you're injured, if you're sick, taking care of that rather than waiting until it's absolutely a dire situation and you're forced into seeking care. All of these aspects together will assist you to reduce your stress and to basically live your best life. So this is a Facebook page that we've put together so that you can support each other with tips on how you support your own mental fitness. And I'll be posting a number of different articles there over the coming weeks and months about staying connected and making sure we talk openly about mental health. And this is you, Barry, all you.
Ah, this is me. Okay, so because you've been so good for the last 45 or so minutes, we are going to give you a free t-shirt. So when you fill out the survey, just give us your feedback on the seminar itself, but you can tell us what size you are, and we will post out a AUSactive t-shirt with you, which will be take care, stay strong. So it'll be a reminder on your back all the time, and hopefully it will also encourage some conversations with people that might see that and say, what's that about? It's an open opportunity for you to start a conversation, because that's where all these support mechanisms actually start, is with a conversation. Just while we're talking about conversations, one of the things I mentioned on this presentation the other day, and being the father of 2 adult men, men have a different way of communicating than females. That's problematic in many ways, particularly when we're talking about mental health and wellness and so on. And so I guess just try and be aware of the men in your life, whether it be a partner or a child or a son or a nephew, whatever, a colleague at work, whatever. Just bear in mind that people actually do communicate in different ways, and men sometimes, well, we know men don't like talking about health generally, and mental health even more so. So you need to be a bit patient. The worst thing you can do is actually try and probe them to open up when they're not ready for it. And one of the things I learned with my 2 boys is that talking to them face to face is not always the best way of doing it. Go for a walk, go for a bike ride. I've surfed with my sons as well, even just standing next to them when I'm doing the dishes and so on at home. They're much freer in talking when they don't actually have to look at you. I don't know why that is, but that's where it is. So please look out for the men in your life. Unfortunately, men are more likely to commit suicide and be successful at a suicide attempt than females, which is really very, very sad. Yeah, so that's good. Thank you, Kathleen.
Luke, no problems at all. Luke, could you just pop back one page? A lot of people are asking for the previous, there we go, QR code. Also like to point out, if you are located in Victoria, part of my position at AUSactive is providing one-on-one counselling and support. So if you're in need of counselling, it's free of charge. So you can contact the customer service team at AUSactive, and they will, or my email address there, as you can see, and organise counselling. I can also talk to your staff. I can do this presentation for staff as well, if there's anybody that requires that. And if you're interested in deeper learning around this topic, this is a very small snapshot of a learning module that will be available with many more CECs over the next few months. And Mind Armour. So this is an app that the Victorian government has funded. It's a mindfulness app. It runs through 10-15-minute sessions on mindfulness with some short introductions to meditation and so on. So it is free for everybody that's in Victoria, but really if you just, between you and me, as long as you don't tell anyone, if you just register for it and pretend you're in Victoria, you can get free access. It's worth $99 a year. It's actually a very good program. I've been evaluating it for the last few weeks. So if you're interested in learning a little more about mindfulness, Mind Armour might be the way for you.
And just to reiterate again, that is actually free. You don't have to pay for it.
No.
And I guess just in closing, the QR code seems to be not working too well. Can we get that back up again? Thanks, Luke. One of the things which has come out loud and clear during the last 2 years, of course, is the importance of exercise and fitness, but particularly exercise in maintaining not just your physical well-being, but your mental well-being. So during the lockdowns, if you recall, we had the 4 reasons to go outside: medical appointments, shopping for essentials, if you couldn't work from home, and for exercise. So there's a much greater awareness now of the importance of exercise to look after your physical and mental wellness. And I guess the people on this call, all of you, play an incredibly important role in everything you do on a day-to-day basis with your workmates, with your clients, with your family, with your colleagues, whatever. Please don't ever underestimate the role that you can play in helping other people look after their mental fitness and their mental wellness as well, because it is really probably one of the most important tasks you'll have in your life. And I thank you on behalf of your clients and the wider community for the work you do. Regardless of the fact that we have had a lot of criticism over the last 2 years, the bottom line is that what you guys all do on a day-to-day basis is critically important. Thank you for that. And thank you on behalf of AUSactive, and thank you on behalf of your clients and the wider community, because without you out there, looking and being aware of these things, there'll be more problems. So keep it up, please, and keep fit and stay strong.
Absolutely. And can I just add, we always look at a mental well-being level, that there's the me, you, and the us. And the me is obviously you looking after your own backyard when it comes to mental health and mental fitness. The us is your closed in sort of group, might be your friends, your family, and your clients. But for everybody that you touch, when it comes to assisting them, whether it be with mental health, mental fitness through exercise, then you are taking that out to the community. So know that every part of you, when I looked at the recent ABS data that's come out, they do every 3 years, that the Australian Bureau of Statistics collect data on mental health, that the number one support that people self-reported that they used to support their mental health was exercise by far. And as I said to the AUSactive team there, you all played a part in it, and everybody on this call has played a part in that statistic as well. So you should all be very proud of it.
Indeed. Okay, well, make sure you get your sleep tonight. You've been lectured by Kathleen about getting into bed before midnight. So please take care. I'm going to go and have a glass of wine now. I think I've earned it. Kathleen, you can have one too. Thanks very much, guys. And we look forward to speaking to you again. Thanks for your attendance tonight. Thank you.